Why are they needed is a lot different than if they're actually being used or being adhered to. In the healthcare industry is a little bit different, right? Because they're kind of forced into indoor air quality, right? You have patients, you have immune-compromised people, somebody laying on an operating table. They're also worried about financials, right? Hospital-acquired infections are a tremendous thing, but they're also a tremendous cost for the hospitals. So they're needed because, unfortunately, it takes events like this. Many years ago, we had Legionella, right? Now, how does that impact how we manage our water through our cooling towers and things like that? So, as an industry, we seem to be very reactive in a lot of cases, pretty much all the time. But indoor air quality, just because we have COVID, shouldn't be something that we are now focusing on, right? It's now brought to the forefront because now people know about it, and people didn't even know, either building owners, operators. They're keeping their buildings from catching on fire every single day, right? They're not proactively looking at things like this. But in essence, it's needed to keep people safe in buildings, right? We want to make sure that we have ventilation standards for not only air, water, all that kind of stuff. But it's mainly to make sure that our buildings are safe for our occupants, whether that be healthcare, offices, things like that. We want to make sure that people in those spaces are provided with the best opportunities to do their job and be productive. So.
John, I know you have some thoughts about some of the importance of IAQ standards, why they're needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've been somewhat fortunate in North America because we licked our pollution problem decades ago, right? When many other countries, especially the developing ones and many parts of Asia, they actually list air pollution as one of the leading causes of death, especially in big cities. And we're starting to see people wake up to the importance of that a little bit, again, even in North America because of COVID. But we still have these issues here. Harvard has done a lot of studies in the last couple of years on this and have found that even at the levels of air pollution in the US, it's affecting employee productivity by as much as 10-15%. It's giving people migraines throughout the day. All these sick buildings are making students less productive. Whole letter grade lost in some of the worst schools for air quality. And they've been able to show that in these studies. And I think because of COVID, it started to enter the common parlance of how important this stuff is. And the liability circuit for some of the buildings that are really bad out there. They've had some issues with liability, people claiming that poor air quality has impacted the occupants. So, all good reasons.
And then why is it comfort and airflow enough?
Well, some of you, I see some gray hair in the list. Some of you gotta remember when.
That's more hair than you.
It is more. When energy management first became prevalent, popular back in the 80s, right, we laid energy management systems on top of on top of pneumatic control systems. What was one of the things they did? They closed all the outside air dampers to minimum, right? Because it increased comfort and it saved energy because they weren't trying to keep cool, bringing in outside air. Well, demand control ventilation was kind of a start to fixing that problem. Everybody's familiar with ECV, right? I'm not talking Greek or anybody, okay? So I think that brought us to the next step, but then COVID happened. And once COVID happened, now comfort and air ventilation trumps energy savings and all those other things because it has to with this. It spawned a whole new group of people. We've heard of the Well Building Institute, right? That kind of literally came up out of COVID from nowhere. Those groups are all about measuring quality of airflow versus just comfort. And we have to have ventilation, and that's been proven. The ASHRAE's written papers on it already. So kind of being forced into more of a role of, we can't just look at comfort anymore. We actually have to look at ventilation and airflow changes and all the things we should have been doing all along anyways.
I think one other quick thing is, we talk about why is IAQ needed. I think everybody knows it's needed. I think the real challenge everybody runs into and things like that is how do we achieve it, and how do we maintain it, right? Because it's one thing to think you have it going on in your building, it's a whole other thing to see if that's actually happening. In a lot of cases, you don't know you don't have it until it's too late. So,
yeah. So that's our opening conversation. Let's dive into what some of the existing standards are. I have a helpful little cheat sheet that goes through some of these. So I don't think by any means this is an exhaustive list, and there are more and more coming out. But let's walk through a few of these. So probably the big one right there in the middle is ASHRAE. ASHRAE has all these different standards. Some of the leading ones for ASHRAE around indoor air quality include 62.1 and 62.2, which are both commercial and residential standards. They're looking a lot at ventilation, temperature, humidity, particulate matter is a big deal. Standards 170, largely around ventilation, very pertinent to the conversation. 36 around sequences and operations. That helps inform how are these systems going to run while also maintaining these standards and keeping them in mind. And then also while looking at 90.1 and the energy that increased ventilation can cause while also remaining inside of the standard. So that's kind of ASHRAE, and what I think we'll see a trend here in a moment. And then you have WELL. Doug brought up WELL. The WELL standard actually looks at 10 characteristics of a building altogether, of which one of them is air. The other ones are water, nourishment, light, movement, thermal comfort, sound, materials, mind, and community. So they try to take a more holistic view of, holistic, humanistic view of everything that's going on in a particular space. Again, air quality not being the least of those, and air quality being the leading factor of why Lady Gaga, for instance, has become a spokesperson for WELL. And then you have Reset there on the left. Their goal is to measure every necessary detail of a building's input and output. This includes things like air, waste, materials, energy, and their primary focus is around real-time data and ongoing measurement. So it's not an annual or every 5-year checkup or audit, it's all around real-time data. Then you have a group right there in the middle, FGI, which stands for Facilities Guidelines Institute. Their primary focus is around the medical facilities of all different kinds, whether it be outpatient, physicians, hospitals. Their goal, they call it not necessarily indoor air quality, but they look at indoor environmental quality, again, more than just air alone, but they also look at things such as emissions, so indoor and also outdoor. EPA, everyone's favorite government organization, they largely look at the ASHRAE standards, but they go to another standard, which is standard 180 around inspection and maintenance. So they're taking their approach and a lot of the messaging around how can you take your existing buildings and make sure you have indoor air quality. They look at, at least they tout 3 primary areas: ventilation, HVAC filtration, and then including portable air cleaners. So that's how they're kind of promoting the conversation around IAQ. And then we have LEED. LEED obviously encompasses many things. They reference ASHRAE 62.1. They're looking primarily at humidity, CO2, and particulate matter. And this was really interesting. They actually then assign points based on measurements around CO2 and total VOC, so volatile organic compounds. So they're looking not necessarily at temperature, humidity, and ventilation. They're looking at the outcomes of being able to manage those things. And then 2 more, I think these are lesser known. You have the International Live Future Institute. They have what's called the Living Building Challenge. Has everyone heard of the Living Building Challenge? Okay, so what they do is similar to, I think, WELL. They look at all kinds of things. They look at place, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, equity, and beauty. How many of you are going out and selling on the beauty of your HVAC opportunities? IAQ is part of one of those pillars, so that's under the health and happiness. And then lastly, another example I give is Fitwell. They have Fitwell assessments around multiple categories within a building, whether it's indoor air quality. They then have an enhanced indoor air quality, which I thought it was interesting they differentiated the 2. Pest management, water, food and beverage, cleaning, etc. They look at things in terms of filters of pollutants, moisture, mold, filtration, housekeeping, and ventilation. And then they also look at what materials you're procuring to actually be in the building. The paint on the walls, the carpet on the floors, the ceiling tiles in your drop ceiling. So you can see that when you talk about indoor air quality standards, some of them are very focused and niche, and some of them are encompassing all these other sort of agendas, probably isn't the right word, but again, they're thinking of many other things in addition to air quality. But they're trying to bring themselves up and promote themselves right now because of the air quality standards that are included in these types of systems. So, quick shout out, is there anything up here that you guys are like, you're not talking about? Is there a standard that you're familiar with that isn't up here?
Is the EPA actually punishing school districts in places like that for not having certain air purification?
It's
Or are they
something,
just making recommendations?
it's something that can come up in a liability case. If they haven't met the standards for a period of time, and this is happening increasingly often.
So they don't have to be necessarily compliant.
Yeah, like, it does depend on the vertical, and like hospitals have a lot more that they have to follow. And it depends on the locale, so the school district or the local government may say, in legislation, that the school district has to follow certain standards, so it depends.
So you see potential liability if you can prove you got sick or something as a result.
Yeah, this has happened, there were a couple of big profile cases just in the last couple of years.
It depends too, who's driving it? Is it a union type thing? And then do you have a recommended solution? That sometimes will appease them. Or are you in the process of implementing a solution? Sometimes that'll appease the situation. Or does it have to be completely done and all installed? So it really depends on who you're dealing with.
I mean, when things come up like this, people are gonna follow them, right? So lawyers are gonna get involved in this kind of stuff, and it's gonna be a paper trail saying, hey, you were aware that this was, if you weren't aware of it before COVID, you are now. Please show us. And again, as we were saying, sometimes hospitals have compliance residential commission, things like that. So you have to come in and monitor that. If they have minor issues, they give you a certain amount of time to correct. The major ones, you have to do quick things like that. Other office spaces, I don't know. It's not really held in that regard, but if somebody comes in there and says, well, you're supposed to have these types of standards, these ventilation rates, prove to me that you have it. If you don't and you knew about it, what steps are you currently taking to do it? If you can't prove it, then there's issues. So,
One that wasn't on there was CDC. Not a lot of people know this, but CDC actually has indoor air quality standards now. They have a whole page on it, rapid response. Mostly they're saying to follow certain ASHRAE standards, but it's important to know, buildings, everyone's saying they're CDC compliant right now. Right? They're cleaning and all the wiping down and doing. Most buildings aren't actually CDC compliant, so there are standards that they list on the page because they're not following the ASHRAE.
And the one that you mentioned that I wanted to throw on there because some of the stuff that you want to talk to your customers and end users and things like that about is what do they already currently have in place that can help them that they don't know about, right? So 90.1, it's energy, it's focused on that. But they talk about economizers in 90.1. And does anybody know what they say in 90.1 about economizer for energy? You have to have fault detection and diagnostics on economizers. Meaning, they're looking at it for energy, right? Because it costs money to condition air. It costs even more money to condition outside air. So you want to take advantage of economizer when you can. However, when you can't, you want to make sure that those dampers, those systems are in place so you're not bringing in too much to waste energy. That same fault detection analytics on those economizers can also help you determine how your indoor air quality is. So again, depending on what people have, it's not necessarily, oh, I got to spend all this money to fix my facility or do a commission, a retro commission, things like that. Let's take a step back and say, what do I already have in place to help me get to where I need to go? And again, most of the time people don't know what they don't know. That's what I'm saying. They don't know that they have a problem. They also don't know they might have a solution to that problem already there.
So with this conversation, including the CDC and these standards as well, to the panel, I'll start with Doug. Which of these do you see as being most common in the conversations you're having?
Well, it depends on who I'm talking to. if you're talking to a consultant, they're more likely to be familiar with the ASHRAE standards, and that's what they typically fall back on. Just because of the amount of visibility it's gotten in the commercial space, you mentioned, already seeing Lady Gaga talking about the Well Building Institute, right? I mean, that's raised a lot of, I'll call it domestic awareness of indoor air quality that typically wasn't there before at a residential type level. Myself personally, and I guess I'll ask a question first, any other lead APs in the room? None.
Congratulations.
Wow, didn't expect
This is why you're here.
I guess so. That's something that I fall back on because I'm very familiar with LEED and the rating system and that. And I was just kind of curious are you still seeing a lot of LEED jobs in your marketplace, or have they kind of tapered off?
I think it's tapered off too. I agree with tapered off.
Yeah. That's been consistent with my experience as well, is what I've seen from kind of a national level for KMC. However, I do think some of the ventilation standards that they've adopted are very valuable and very relevant to the situation that we're dealing with today. So, maybe time to go back and revisit some of those again and just use those. If nothing else, they can be sounding boards and suggestion ideas for you to have discussions with your clients about air quality.
Brad, what do you think? What's most common? What's rising to the top?
Most common, at least in what I see and deal with, majority of healthcare is, ASHRAE 170, and which again FGI references. They all reference each other, right? Nobody wants to make a decision, so FGI says, well, ASHRAE will reference ASHRAE 170. Most state codes will reference FGI or ASHRAE 170. Again, because hospitals a long time ago were forced to do this, right? They have to worry about indoor air quality. And we're talking about a lot of in the present right now, but what this is going to do, especially in healthcare, I hope all other places, is start to lead to better designs where we're preparing for this stuff in the future. COVID is big, but it's not the first time something like this has happened. We had SARS, how many years ago that was? Obviously, it wasn't as big as COVID, but it was an issue that maybe we should pay more attention to. Hospitals already looking at that. We're looking at a design right now where they're turning their patient floors as a new hospital. They're all going to have the capability to go to isolation. So full pandemic response floors. You hear that all the time. Hospitals are running out of isolation rooms, things like that. Well, that's now going to drive design. It's going to drive design to say, hey, we have 500 patient rooms, only 100 room isolation rooms. What is it going to take those other 400 into a pandemic response like this? And again, to do that, you need controls. You need to monitor these buildings. You need to have the ability to be flexible. I think that's what, I don't know if they're going to rise to the top, but that's my hope and my goal is that these standards where it's not just, hey, we put this in place 20 years ago, seems like it's been working okay, no big issues, we'll leave it alone. Where this is hopefully, as we are reactive, we can start to be proactive and say, how can we be better? How can we plan for the next one? And start developing things to be more dynamic in our response to things moving forward across healthcare and everything like that. Because, as you mentioned, sick building syndrome has been a thing for a long, long time. And we are now, I'm now starting to get to an old man as I'm talking about younger generations. We have college students, we have young kids that are now in tune with a lot of the environmental impacts that we have in our society. So as these kids are growing up and going through school, they're going to be asking these questions. They're going to be asking the university leaders. They're going to be asking their employers, what type of eco programs are we participating in? How is our impact on the environment if we're going to work for an automotive company? That's going to drive a lot more of this as well too. So.
John, you see anything rise to the top?
Yeah, I agree with Doug on it's ASHRAE that's at the top, but WELL is certainly gaining grounds quite quickly. Depends a lot on the locale. So other countries may or may not care. Like in the UK, green is the big one. And even in the US, there's quite a lot of variety depending on the locale and the vertical. Many times they'll reference, ASHRAE or WELL, but they'll also have their own requirements. And you brought up a really good point. The constituents, the people in the buildings, are having a lot more to say on this in the future, and we need to cater increasingly, I think, to making the occupants comfortable because they're driving a lot of the demand. Yeah, and that's only increasing because they want safe buildings. They don't want to be in safe buildings all day long.
Yes.
I got a question. Have you seen, we've been in a lot of hospitals and dealt with a lot of, airside systems for hospitals, and quite honestly, I've seen some of them where I'm just like, I cannot believe that they haven't shut them down, that they're in such bad condition. And, in Jaco, it seems sometimes they, a blind eye is they just walk right by and they don't enforce it because I mean, that to me is the primary driver, air quality in a healthcare facility. Are you seeing any more stringent, adherence to you got, writing up, where they see inadequacies and, where air handling units are falling apart and coils are plugged and, just a mess, and where they're, because I've seen, I mean, it is bad, and it makes me wonder how they even got by with it.
No. I mean, in fact, up in Michigan where I'm at, they were giving hospitals a break because of the tremendous stress they were under. Saying we're not going to do this, we're not going to do walkthroughs, not going to wait, we're going to do time, things like that. I always tell people, like, if I'm said spend so much time in the hospital, I always tell people if I'm sick, find someplace else to take it. Because, I mean, as most of the time on the mechanical side, if you go to the bellies of those buildings and you see what's actually going on there, you run for the hills.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not the minority, that's the majority. I mean, I'm sorry to say it, if you at ASHI here in Nashville in August, there's a great presentation on deferred maintenance across healthcare facilities, and it's just massive. I think they're actually going to be going to Congress to talk about this as an initiative because if I forgot how many trillions of dollars it is, but I can tell you in Michigan alone, one hospital system, I work with 14 hospitals, and that state rate for maintenance right now is $350 million. $350 million for 14 hospitals. I think they need to spend almost $20 million per hospital per year just to maintain what they're at. That's not even making a dent to improve things. So yeah, it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue, and a lot of the times we're seeing is, like I said earlier, the facility staff are horribly understaffed. Guys do more with less. So what do? Those guys are literally putting out fires nonstop. Do they have time to be proactive and look at stuff? No. What they do is they rely on mechanical contractors. Hey, I have this air handler fail, I need a new one, give it to me, right? Is that mechanical contractor the perfect person to ask that? I don't know. Some are, some aren't. So we're going to do the best interest for them. Some are, for the hospital. As well as, again, I always like to say that if you're proactive in what you're doing, whether it's a hospital or not, if you're proactive in those solutions, you run the budget and we run the timeline. If you're not, the emergency is in control. You're out of luck in a lot of different senses. But the hospital healthcare industry, everybody says, oh, they know what they're doing. They have standards, but how well they follow and how well they maintain them. And most of the cases, it's not their fault, right? They just are understaffed and run technology. The infrastructure is so old, so old. And unfortunately, we just see that a lot of times with JCO, they're going through during their assessments, and they're not hitting anything, right? They have a checklist of what they're hitting, that day, that week, whatever they're there. And it's a drop in the bucket compared to what's going on. So.
Oh yeah, I've been in hospitals in accounts where facilities and records. Oh, I got JCO coming next week. I got JCO. I'm gonna get ready for JCO and this and that. What are you doing? For your HVAC equipment. They don't. It's like it's a blind eye. They don't even pay attention to it.
The other part of, especially the healthcare industry, is that it's rapidly approaching a spot where we have the old guard leaving and there's nobody following behind. You have the boiler guy that's been there for 50 years, knows every backdoor trick to get that wire and work and keep it up and running. That guy will tell you if it happens.
We're working with one hospital chain in Australia using Commander. They're pulling the building data out of the building, and they're taking that data and doing a reference check across the indoor air quality of other hospitals, and then against that data, they're running patient reinfection, patient infection rates to see, what are the infection rates compared to the indoor air quality, what indoor air quality is working versus what indoor air quality isn't, And then obviously every building is different, every region is different, climate is different too. So, yeah, there's some that are taking a data-driven approach. It's not necessarily an IAQ standard approach, but perhaps it is. I'm not familiar with the Australian standards. But, you know, there are real world externalities to these kinds of decisions. One thing we talked about just a little bit a second. Yes, Don.
We are seeing consolidations and takeovers within hospitals, especially northeast and now northwest line. With that, there were timeframes where that takeover was more of an affiliate status for those 2 or 3 years, grace period, to get the standards up to acceptable limits for JCO. So we're seeing some funding become available in part of those takeovers to allow that improvement to happen. Whether it's sufficient or enough, you know, maybe not, but at least I see something spilling over into that acceptance that we have some problems we need to address. And I've actually seen within the affiliates, one's hospital status didn't make it, so they never became a Woodland hospital, and they're affiliated probation or that's one. So I see some changes there with that.
And there's a huge, I would say, across the country with different hospital systems, I see 90% of them don't even have their own standard specs for MVP design. Well, non-existent. More of a problem. Yep. Yeah, no problem. They don't have, they're relying on the contractor coming in, whatever he's got to install, or the engineer that project uses their standard spec, right? So, if you have no standard, how do you know what you're getting from project to project? You just did a patient floor with isolation this year. How was that done with the one that was done 5 years before? What could be completely different?
And they're completely different consulting engineers, right? Because it's put out for code and it is bad.
You know, let's get this regional question. Let's go and let's talk about engineers, right? So how are engineers thinking about IAQ? The question is, are they leading or are they lagging? What else are you saying about them?
Yeah, again, it totally is dependent on the size of the organization. You know, your larger,
Of the engineering
yeah, the
organization?
engineering
Okay.
organization. Yeah, your larger, I call it A&E firms, right, where you've got architect and engineer all together under one roof. They're much more likely to have a specialist in-house that at least has some knowledge of HVAC controls and ventilation and how everything's supposed to all work together. If you get into some of the smaller firms, you know, the 1, 2, 3-man type of shops, they totally rely on their vendors to come in and provide that expertise for them. So some are right on the cutting edge and others are sorely lagging behind, and they're counting on you to be their expert. And that's where you have an opportunity to bring some value to the table, because if you can prove to them you can help them with this, they're going to call you and they're going to lay out their next job.
I mean, are they thinking about IAQ? That goes along, are they getting paid to think about IAQ? I don't know. Brand new state-of-the-art hospital is going up all over. Talk to the engineers, how you design this, Codeman, it's all being paid for, Codeman. Okay, you have a state-of-the-art hospital that's going to open, and it's got 10, 15-year-old technology. It's Codeman, it's code. So, and again, not trying to, same thing with hospitals, right? They have a proposal that goes out, right? I'm an engineer, I get a job, I submit that to an owner. If he likes my price, great, I get it. That's tied to hours. Engineers don't have unlimited hours to sit and research. They have co-minimum, right? They have standards they have to adhere to. This is a office building, so I have this many CFM per square foot. How much of that is outside here, all that kind of stuff. But are they looking at cutting edge technology to say, hey, is there a better way to do this? Things like that. And that's where, you know, the opportunities there as a good manufacturer, especially with KMC, because I just know from my experience with KMC is not just going to throw something out there because they want to have also, you know, also brand product out there. Unfortunately, the manufacturers are the ones that are paying to do the research, right, on all this stuff. How is it working? How is it compared to what's out there? And it's not necessarily a bad thing to have you guys drive that, because unfortunately, nobody else is really. I mean, again, they're gonna repurpose the same spec they've used for 15, 20 years. I can guarantee you, when we're talking about air quality, talking about before when we're looking at airflow measuring station, I can guarantee you one thing that's always going to be in there, because it's one that's always been there. There's that truck. Ask the engineer, why do you use that truck? I don't know, it's been in our spec for 15 years. Okay. Great reason to use it. So, and again, not saying Upfront's bad, but how are you applying that tool to the situation? One tool does not fit all. One solution does not fit all. So again, I think the engineers are hamstrung a lot just because they don't have the time. Everybody's got to do bare bones on their bids to get the jobs, things like that. And unless they're specifically directed by owners, or owners have a good spec, again, going back to that, don't let somebody else drive the design of what you want in the building. You have to empower those owners and end users to say, this is what I want. That's part of why new building commissioning is supposed to be there, right? That commissioning agent is an owner's rep. Sits down with the owner, creates an OPR and says, what do you want in this building? How do you want it to function? We are the person that's going to hold those people accountable. So you are getting exactly what you pay for. When this building comes online, it's going to meet all those requirements and things like that. So there's many different things. I think in some areas we're leading, others we're lagging. But again, we have to, I think it's manufacturers like KMC that are going to be moving that needle to spend the time, the money, and the research to help drive a lot of these things moving forward and make standards better.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is it's not really quite fair to say broad brush that anyone's leading or lagging, because again, they're going to do what they're asked to do. John, you could add there?
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment. They're going to do what they're incentivized to do, and I think we need to help them realize that there's a lot of incentives that they don't currently realize right now for actually encouraging clients and buildings to go out and follow these standards. There's liability issues. They're not going to make their affiliate thresholds if they're a hospital and they have that opportunity to come along. And then just the cost of doing that maintenance, deferring that maintenance in the future is going to look like.
So we kind of have the engineering perspective, right? What's holding them back, or what's, how are they incentivized? What about just in general? What about the people, asking the engineers to do these things? Doug, what do you think's holding back the adoption of these standards?
I would say financial is probably one of the first ones. They want to do the right thing, they know they need to do the right thing, but they may not have the money to do the right thing. And then the second, and this is a topic that was just hit on pretty heavy, is they don't have the equipment they need, or the equipment they have is in such disrepair that they can't do the right thing. Physically, it's just not capable of doing it. Pardon?
Capacity.
Yeah, capacity. So I would say, the short answer, my short answer would be either financial, they can't afford it, or B, they just don't have what they need to do it, and they don't have the money to get what they need.
John, what's you saying?
I would say it's financial mostly. There's a lot of stuff you can do though that can fall into budgets. You don't have to go and replace your air handler to be able to prove that you're in compliance in the liability situation. You just need monitoring. That's cheap. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there that doesn't involve rip out and replace the whole system. So some education there I think is important.
Right, anything outside of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's financial, but you can always spin that too. I like to say is that, again, if you're always gonna walk in and say, hey, my facility managers are like this all the time. I've submitted this for the last 5 years in my capital plan. We don't need to do it. Let me see your capital plan. It's a 5-line spreadsheet, and all it says is new chiller $500,000. That's it. Like, okay, I want to give you that either. However, if you say, what's the cost of doing nothing? What if that chiller, that air handler is serving you ORs that we're talking about, and you lose the capacity to do surgeries in 10 ORs for a week? Millions of dollars. That chiller will pay for itself on the first day of not being able to do surgeries. So if you spin it that way and say, hey, we're not trying to come in and make you spend all your money. Let's look at it and say, we're going to spend money, but here's the ROI. Here's how we're going to pay it back. Here's how it's going to benefit you. Not only, we talk about energy savings all the time. Energy savings are great. Energy savings are great the first couple of years. You get that low-hanging fruit, you eliminate drift. But where you really start to make a lot of these impacts is your operational maintenance, right? We said it before. Everybody's stretched thin. They have to do a lot more with a lot less. So if you can start to make the operational maintenance a lot smoother and more proactive, there's a lot more capacity for those people to do more work, more things moving forward, grab some of that low-hanging fruit. But I think we're in a good spot now, unfortunately, because of the fact that everybody's thinking about it, and it's just education. I think that's, when it comes to specifying this stuff, I think that's, the other thing that might be holding back is people just don't know, they're scared. Oh, I can't call this contractor this engineer, it's going to be too much money for me to come out here. Okay, you pay somebody, $1,000 to come along to the facility for a day, and they do quick facility condition assessment. What do you have in place already? What don't you have? What does it take to fill that gap? I think a lot of people just start assuming like, oh, it's the worst case, I have to spend all this money. Well, that might not be the case, right? I'd rather know than not know until it's too late. But I think you guys have a great opportunity to go out there and educate and say, this is what's out in the marketplace, this is what's going to make it better, and this is where it's going, because this is not going to be nice to have very soon, it's going to be a requirement. I mean, we talk about monitoring and analytics and fault detection. Right now it's nice to have, but you know what? You're going to need to sooner rather than later. At some point, people are going to come in and Jayco's not just going to walk up and do that tissue outside the OR. They're going to, on that one week, every 3 years when they come out, they're going to show me your last 6 months and tell me that this OR was compliant every single time there was a strict review.
Yeah, Mr. Hospital owner, you pay your insurance. Why do you pay your insurance? It's $500 a month. Because I don't want to pay $1 million when I have to go in for surgery. So keep up on your maintenance, or you're going to have a passion in the future.
I think
Brad brought up an excellent point that I just wanted to expound on just a little. When you talk about being able to go out, and it's real easy, and we fall into this, especially those of us that wear a sales hat or have some sort of sales responsibility, to go into sit down with your customer, and start diving into your little bag, oh yeah, I can sell you this, or oh yeah, I can sell you that, I've got all these things that will solve your needs. When you need to turn from more of a pushing a product to listening to your customer and become more of a consultant. When you become more of a consultant, you cross into a different threshold, and you're in a different spot than your competitors are. You can now offer solutions that are more likely to listen to your advice, as Brad said, versus just going in and saying, yeah, we're going to do this.
It makes me think of our two general session speakers when Jason talked about you get the education and enablement side, and then there's kind of like that motion there. You got to do a lot of the education that's up front, and then say, I'm able to help you do that. And then when John was talking about what are the two things for motivation, it's either rewards or fear. So the opportunity cost is the fear, and I think that's pretty palpable, especially when you start talking about medical. But then it's also like, well, what's in it for me if I adopt a standard? And that obviously depends on your audience, and listening to them is really important. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you guys think of in terms of what's hindering adoption?
Yeah, so we talked about all the standards before, and if you want to impact, we did this in Nebraska. I'm pretty involved in ASHRAE, so if you look at the other standards, so there's a guy named Rick Federizzini, and he's the founder of League. So he ran League for 15 years. Made a lot of money using ASHRAE standards and Iaq standards and everything else, reformatting it into great marketing material, and made a lot of money. Well, that started slowing down, and so and that was actually technically not-for-profit. He look on his LinkedIn. He then created Web and made it even more for profit, and that's how he has the money to be able to hire this guy and everything else. But it's the same guy. That's why you're seeing League drop and Well pick up. He's using the same ASHRAE standard. So that kind of frustrated some of us good old boys in Nebraska, especially those of us who spend a lot of time with ASHRAE. ASHRAE has identified this as a huge issue as well. They're basically giving up all their intellectual property to some people that are making a lot of money off of it while they're not. So there's a huge grassroots effort for local, state, federal government. So there's lobbying things to help out. There's a whole entire section of ASHRAE created. So instead of having an owner say, I'd love to have a well building, or I'd love to have a well hospital or a lead hospital or whatever, we said, the heck with that. We just went straight for a straight state legislature. Most states use a 90.1 that's 10 years or older, over 50% of states. There's only 10 states in the whole country, I believe, use the most up-to-date standard, which is 2018. Yeah, and most states, I shouldn't say most states, a lot of states, I know every state that surrounds Nebraska and Iowa, including Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, do not even have it. They have local municipality codes, but they don't even have state code. So what we did as our ASHRAE chapter is we used all the money that our companies give us backing, and we used that, dumped it into just going nuts on our state legislature. We used all the power of ASHRAE, and we now have this up-to-date energy code. So we're trying to figure out how to get these owners out of the pockets of doing it. Leverage ASHRAE and leverage their lobbying power. Because once the state passes it, you're done. You're working people. Then these guys are just following the code. it's easy, instead of trying to talk them through the well, or lead, or whatever, rig fed Brazil, or, there's a lot of us volunteers.
Well, that's why we're here.
Yeah.
To make it. Let's talk about, COVID. I think obviously state regulation is certainly something that they take advantage of here. Are we seeing COVID affecting the standards conversation or affecting the standards we're at?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes.
Short answer.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
I mean, good and bad, right? I mean, it's, we're talking about it, right? But again, it's something that should be talked about all the time, right? COVID shouldn't be the end all be able to get people to start thinking about this stuff. It shouldn't take people getting sick and dying for us to look at how the air is in our buildings, whether it be a school, office, or anything like that. The flip side of that is that, like I said before, when you're in an emergency situation, that emergency dictates almost everything you do, right? If you're out in the water, if you know you're gonna be out in the water, it's best to learn how to swim, right? Because if you're drowning, you're pretty much gonna grab everything I throw at you. That might be a life preserver, might be a break, right? So you're gonna be dictated by your situation. But, so then we kind of see that. We see a lot of people come out of the woodwork with, I have the solution, let me come to your business, let me put this in, it's gonna make you compliant. People are scared, right? So like, okay, well, this sounds great. I don't have the money to go pay somebody else to go do it. This sounds like a good option, let me do it. Is it good or bad? I don't know. Some of them are bad, some of them might be good. We don't have enough time to see that kind of stuff. So I think it's good because, again, we're going to change. Hopefully we're going to be more dynamic, we're going to be more proactive, but at the same time, we have to look out for our customers, be that trusted advisor to give people information. And a lot of it's not just going in and saying, hey, I have a great solution for you. Just say, hey, how are they going? What are you guys looking at? What have you been told? Ask them what's going on in the industry. I mean, they might be hearing God knows what. Spray perfume in there. It's great. It's going to kill stuff. Just be that trusted advisor and ask those questions to say, well, what are your customers hearing? Things like that. And that way you can be that advisor to say, hey, well, I might have some solutions or some help to give you, and I can do that myself, or I can engage people we work with to say, here's the best option for you. So again, I think it all goes back to education, right? It's people are hopefully empowering themselves that way a little bit more.
John?
Yeah, it's both good and bad. Obviously, the awareness that has been created because of COVID and this issue is really good. It's bad too, we've gone too far in some ways. A lot of the common responses that companies have been doing are probably places like this. They'll go in and just spray the air just dust the air with aerosolized cleaning products. That stuff doesn't go away. It lingers around in the air for several hours, and so our VOC levels are just off the charts now because of that, and it gets into your lungs and burns your lungs basically. So it's not all good. And I think what we'll see happen is people will maximize their air handling for COVID and for bringing as much fresh air in as possible. And then they'll realize that they'll look at their energy bill, and their energy bill is off the charts. And so I think once the COVID excitement dies down, we're going to have to come up with a new synthesis of how do we balance air quality with energy. And so hopefully that's where in the future we get some balance between these two things that are both important.
I think looking at that holistically, you gotta tell people, hey, somebody's coming in, hey, well, all you need to do is put a HEPA filter in there. It fits, it's fine, don't worry about it. Well, what other problems are you creating? Can your fan handle that? I'm just gonna open up my building 100% outside air. Fresh air is great, everybody was told 100% outside air, great. Well, now the problems are you creating in your chill water plant, right? You got coils, I mean, it's a nightmare. So it's not just one size fits all, it's gotta be, let's look at it as a system approach and say, what's the best option? And ASHRAE came out with that very, very early on, and it's been in the healthcare industry for a long time, right? We can't sacrifice patient safety for safety, right? We have to do what is best for that period of time in that facility to keep people safe. If that means we have the ability to open up 100% economizing, and we can do it, that's going to keep people safe, and you gotta do it. You know it means necessary to control that environment, then you gotta do it. So, there's going to be a big circle around in terms of on the energy side.
That's a hard balance to strike too. You need smarter systems. we have right now to be able to effectively balance all of these different things and also minimize energy spend. So,
Another thing that we,
Well, I know you guys had mentioned demand control ventilation. And do you see demand control ventilation becoming a code so that, you know,
Actually, ASHRAE says you have to disable that as part of this response. It's one of the responses. If you're going into a building, you should disable demand control ventilation.
really, you mean in regards to,
In regards to COVID response.
right?
DCB is good at Seattle, though. Like, you have that.
Yeah, the West Coast, the West Coast is code.
It just is what it is.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, like you said, disabled with COVID, but.
well, that's kind of part of this conversation, right? Like, are the effects of COVID helpful and proper? There's so much debate around that. And also the thing that we talked about, well, prepping for this a little bit was, you know, COVID is not a neutral problem. It comes along with all kinds of fears, anxieties, not just how do I solve this problem in my building, but how does this affect the people in the building? What are the liabilities associated with it? What about me? You know, so there's, you know, it's such a nuanced problem that we're really dealing with. It's interesting in that regard.
John, I mean, one question maybe to everybody here, I mean, what response have you guys seen? I mean, are people freeing up money to, you know, do testing in their buildings, things like that? Or are people just stuck with their budget and they have to deal with it, they have to make do? I mean, because we've seen that in places where, you know, everyone's giving schools X amount of dollars to do just an assessment, right? Not even to make a fix. Here's $10 grand to hire somebody to come do assessment. And I can tell you almost nobody was doing it. So either, you know, don't know who to talk to. I'm just interested to see if there's been any outside of, you know, places I have that.
Now, is there a phase 3 of the COVID relief? Is that coming through? Because I know I'm working with the school district. They said, and they need massive upgrades for IEQ issues. And, they said, well, we're trying to get the money allocated in the phase 3 program for COVID.
There's the CARES Fund, there's ESSER, and there's ESSER 2. And so those are kind of like the 3 ways. And my understanding is that they've all been distributed, at least at the state level, and oftentimes already announced at the district level. And now the district's trying to figure out where it's going to go.
Not the third phase yet. It's
Not the third phase yet.
It's in process. ESSER 2 allow, or even suggested that you use that for HVAC improvement. So ESSER 2 is already in progress now, being spent. ESSER 3, they changed what that can be used for, and you might as well put it back in the general fund. Like, they're looking at it more for how you get the kids' standards back up, because they missed a year. So there are a lot of them, I know a lot of our districts are hiring teachers on a 3 years, you have to spend the money in 3 years. They're gonna have 3-year contracts within their unions that say you're not gonna get tenured and be on staff. It's a 3-year hiring. So they're trying to use the monies as they feel appropriate for their districts. But those ESSER 2 funds really were earmarked for them. Yeah. We saw a lot of activity in bipolar ionization as a way to kind of clean up things.
We took it.
Don, great segment.
We do a large amount of charter and private schools. So we took the ASHRAE guideline and we went to its customers, and so we increased ventilation, went to our 13 filtration. And the one disagreement was in the marketplace is ASHRAE recommends to us how you get seat over bipolar. So we probably installed over or upgraded with, I would say, with 300 units for these schools. Now the ventilation thing, I think I told the story about this, the school rate on 15 volt in the morning. We'll just be overcorrected on outdoor air. This was 65 degrees in the morning. It wasn't really morning. But we learned from that reprogramming the control system. So at 5 degrees, you go to take out the air. It's not meeting standard, unfortunately, but it's beyond its on. So we were good with that. We helped a lot of because a lot of those schools committed to families. Private schools were paying $20,000 a year to send your student there. You think they're less remote learning? This school they threw $100,000 at at the school in a matter of weeks, saying, because then they send a letter out, the guy that was the design student, they had kindergarten overview that they got sent to all the parents of that school. So it was, you know, really helped them out. They claimed they had minimal issues. So it was a success there. It wasn't newer buildings, like, when I say newer, the oldest project is 20 years old. You know, city of Minneapolis and schools that have all of our clean. Seattle's and Seattle's and schools out there.
Let's jump to these next couple of questions rather quickly. So, generally speaking, panel, what do you see as the technologies that have been overutilized in terms of indoor air quality?
I don't know if it's a technology, but I would just say, do it. I mean, complacency. I mean, it just is. It's like we've always done it this way, so we're going to continue to do that until somebody tells us differently, or we get in trouble. I mean, again, like I said, it's a horribly reactive industry, and I think again, if it's not something that is, you know, shoved down your throat, even then, at times it's tough to get people to do it. It's going to be tough. I will leave that letter now. I don't know if there's anything really overutilized. I think that, you know, there's a lot of good methods out there. I mean, we always look at, you know, pressure in the building, right? And people just seem to always discount how much air movement and controlling pressure, how much that can impact your building in terms of keeping it safe, and energy saving as well too, right? I mean, if you're keeping infiltration and things like that out of your building, bringing in unconditioned air, and possibly dirty or infected air is a tremendous way to control things in the building. It just is. It's time improving again, and it's not going anywhere. So,
What do you think, John? Anything being overutilized?
Yeah, this is actually being overutilized.
Yeah. Doug?
Yeah, I would say misapplied might be a better word than overutilized. I mean, how many times have you heard people say, yeah, throw a MERV 13 filter in there, right? Well, who's the guy that makes out for that? The filter sales guy. The other guy that makes out in that case is the guy who sells replacement ECM motors, okay? Because they're not designed for that level of static load. And so it's an overutilized technology. It's not to say it's not a good idea, but it has to be properly applied. And the application, I think, is where it falls down. And then, John, you mentioned another one, kind of near to my heart, just spraying things, right, as a disinfectant. My wife drives a school bus in our school district. And they are required twice a day to go through and spray and disinfect their entire bus. Now, this time of year, it's not so bad because it's still warm outside. You can open the windows and get some ventilation in there. But in the middle of winter, it's just a nice little petri dish of whatever's in the bus at the time, okay? And some of that stuff that she sprays, I mean, she'll tell me a lot of the bus drivers don't do it because they gag you. They literally can't breathe after they spray that down. So what's going to happen is they're going to stop doing it. So it's a misapplied technology.
I think the other thing we need to talk about, any type of technology, which I'm sure everybody here is familiar with, is the time it's taking to get materials now, right? You can't just walk in and say, I need a filter for my building's going to solve my problems. All right, we're waiting. I need a meantime.
We're seeing lead times on Heather's of like 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about UVC? Would you guys say that that's overutilized? Underutilized? You'd say more? What about BPI, bipolarization? Is that overutilized? Is it underutilized?
I think you get more misapplied with that than you get.
These are meant to be incendiary words.
I think that it's very beneficial, but if you do it correctly, if you are, sometimes you got to have these conversations with an owner, customer. Are we trying to do something, or are we trying to look like we're doing something? And, if you can get them to answer the question honestly, because you can put some, we'll call it cost-effective bipolar ionization in something and move on. But if you're not doing it correctly, you just.
That's right.
Yes.
So
but
here's a plug. Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, here's a plug for tomorrow. We have another session that's around ionization. We're coming up with a solution to help solve the ionization conundrum. It's on, but what is it doing? How do I measure that? And And so we're gonna find, we're gonna educate.
There is a way to measure it.
Huh?
There is a way to measure it. They have, some of the manufacturers that we deal with,
GPS,
yeah, and they have a product that you can use.
and I would encourage you to go to that session tomorrow and learn more.
Whether or not that works, I don't know.
So, I mean, I think the question that they'll bring up is the difference between positive and negative ions, and how that plays a factor, and how you can better control that.
And where are you gonna
One
measure?
is not as good as the other.
And where are you gonna measure it?
Right, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Measure the space or the discharge.
it's just a teaser,
Or even that.
teaser for tomorrow.
Where does it goes all over the charts.
Oh, right.
It depends on your current.
Figures don't lie, but liars figure. I mean, it's.
You had kind of mentioned, I'm sorry, I've been trying to, because we also have a couple other slides I want to go through, but you had also mentioned how ASHRAE is not recommending BPI, but they're recommending BBC. So the question then is, there's all these recommendations. John mentioned the aerosoling. You know, is that part of these recommendations and standards? So now, again, to the panel, are the standards appropriately accounting for all current IAQ technologies? The incendiary word.
Yes, I mean,
It's appropriate, yeah.
I think again, I mean, you guys hit right on the head, right, is how are you applying it, right? Is it the right technology for the situation, right? It's not one size fits all. I mean, unfortunately, we run into people that are going to take it and try and apply it to everything because they want to sell it, right? They're going to capitalize on what's going on right now. So let me throw that line out and get as many bites as I can, great. It's going to work for some, it's going to be awful for others, other people are going to be indifferent, right? So I think it just all goes back to the right tool for the right job. It's kind of what I see, right? Because there's things out there, like I said, ventilation and how we control how air moves through a building, right? We're always going to do that. That's proven technology. Other stuff, it's going to yet to be determined how it's going to work. So maybe tomorrow, next week, somebody's going to come out with something that's it's all over.
John, what do you think?
Yeah, I wish FDA would move faster to make a decision on BPI. Because UVC is the only technology out there that they explicitly support for actually combating COVID. And they have an article on BPI that's like, we don't really know yet. That's basically all it says. And so you still have all these people, you know, selling BPI, and it probably works. But a lot of people are on the fence right now because the regulators haven't made a call on this. So a lot of people are scared to install it. The other thing is what I mentioned earlier about how are we going to balance energy efficiency with indoor air quality and occupant health and wellness. No one, to my knowledge, has even started touching this yet or thinking about it in the standards organizations. And so this is going to be the next problem that we're all going to have to solve together.
Doug, anything to add to this question?
Yeah, I guess the word standards is kind of the theoretical stumbling block here. Standards will always lack what technology is capable of doing. Because whenever a standard is developed, it's a group of people who get together and make a decision by consensus. You ever try to get your family to figure out where you want to go for dinner? I mean, right, anytime you try to put a group of people together and make a decision, it's going to take longer. And technology is moving faster than the standards. So do I think there will always be some sort of lag there? Yes, I do. And I think that's where we can fill that role with our customers to make sure they're aware of the latest opportunities that are out there.
This is where, I mean, we're excited. I know it was last September, John, a year ago, that we did our first webinar on Commander EQ. And so, quick plug for what Commander EQ is. What we do with Commanders, we tie into a building over backend, Modbus, SNMP, and we pull in all this building data. That data is great and valuable. You do your trends, your schedules, your alarms, your dashboarding, tenant engagement, give people the dashboards that they want to see. But now, how can you use that data to push further value? Well, everything that we're talking about today around IAQ standards, that's what Commander EQ is for. So it's a separate system that uses the same data coming out of Commander, and then based on those standards, can show that information and score your buildings and your zones on things like air freshness, air quality, occupancy, wellness. The numbers that are then associated are based on calculations around the standard. We give different kinds of dashboard options in terms of how you want to see it, and who needs to see it, who gets that. And John, you're kind of the architect of this whole platform, and what else about this do we want to make sure we drive home?
Yeah, so if you're in a building that has occupants that are weary, this is great for it. And I don't know if you have a screenshot of it. You can go on the KMC website and find screenshots of some of the report on that one. Yeah, so this is being put into schools as a dashboard to show principal, stakeholders, schools, and many other buildings where the stakeholders actually are really weary about the air quality. And then this is one version of it. There's a couple other that work as kiosks to show the air quality environment.
Put it in a lobby, put it on a website, put it behind an intranet, whoever you want to be able to show it to. How do you make it as easily digestible and available as possible?
It's something that goes on top of existing installs pretty easily. If you combine it with the air quality or airflow measurement system from KMC, you can get the airflow measurement really easily too. And then go back, so this is the reporting. So basically, we talked about liability a lot. This is specifically designed to give them that proof that they were following, EPA or ASHRAE standards, and it's completely configurable for whatever standard they need or they think they want to follow in the building. And we'll support all of the ones that you saw on that earlier slide with the standards, as well as other ones like BREEAM.
So again, education and enablement, these are the tools that you can help deliver to your customers so that they know what their air quality is. And then also there's all kinds of filter maintenance scheduling and associated alarming associated with it, and all that feeds back and forth into it.
Yeah, the filters all changes for UVCs that make building maintenance will get text alerts when it's time. So they don't forget.
Okay, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So I got an email from a client this morning wanting to know about IAQ, and they said we think we may have mold issues. How could you detect, other than seeing, visibly seeing? I mean, is there a way to sample the air to know if there is?
Yeah, there are VOC sensors that pick up mold. Because they'll pick up,
The
pick up from all
VOC?
Yeah, so
Depending on what you're using, there's companies now that will ship you the kits, and they require that somebody stays and watches them and things like that. You sign off and send it back, and so they're going to tamper and test it. I did it for a company, and make it for the new carpet somewhere. So the off smells from the carpet was driving everybody crazy. They thought it was something coming into the outside air. But you just have to look. Some of them do have mold, they'll do things like that.
Yeah, and they'll also detect formaldehyde, which is one of the most common causes of bad smells in buildings. Gives people headaches if they're in the building. And if you have a VOC sensor, that's one of the ones that we support on here. So we'll tell you if your VOCs are performing or if they're too high.
So that would be one method.
Yeah, if you get the sensor that can detect mold and install it and pull it in. Yeah, pull it into a commander when you normally look back there, that's going to be on us. Then this will work. And we'll have a dashboard that says VOCs are acceptable. Not working.
Okay, great. That's good information.
So for the panelists, and then I'll wrap this up. Final thoughts, Brad, IAQ, final thoughts around it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's education. I think everybody here has the opportunity now. And again, even if more money's coming, that people are going to have the opportunity to spend money in areas they probably shouldn't have been looking at before all this happened. But I think now it's the opportunity, to use it, to get into the doors and talk to people about the importance of it and educate them and say, hey, it's not the daunting task that we think it is. There's some ways that we might be able to help you. So, I just always think that the conversation of going in, don't be scared. It's not, hey, let me sell you this magic pill, it's going to get rid of everything. But the education is say, hey, your building's fine. You have great indoor air quality. However, we can make it even better, whether it be controls, whether it be airflow monitoring stations, things like that. Because there are people that are on the forefront of that. As bad as I've said, hospitals are some really, really good ones that are out there on the forefront of trying to do a lot of this stuff. And we're well ahead of this before it even happens. So.
John, final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really excited for the additional awareness that is happening. People are finally waking up to the importance of this, and I think it's going to keep happening. It's creating a lot of opportunity for people in our industry to solve a completely different problem from energy management. And we'll have to figure out how to balance those things. But what was the most recent bill passed? 1.5 trillion, 3.5 trillion or something. A lot of this money is going in to fix these problems now. And I think it's presented in the right way. We can address it and access them.
Keep finding those capital T's everywhere.
Yeah.
What about you, Doug? Final thoughts?
Real simple, one word, proactive. Be proactive with your customers, be proactive with your consulting engineers. You've got the knowledge, you've got the tool sets. This is what we do for a living. It's our time to shine, folks. Be out there, educate your customers, help them to recognize that you are the expert in your area because you want them to rely on you. That's how you grow your business. We have a great opportunity here to really capitalize on something we all know something is about. Hopefully you picked up a few pointers here today, or at least some conversation topics that you can have with your customers to start the discussion.
My final thought is, if you guys want to learn more about Commander AQ, come up right after this, let me know. Let's jot down your name. And then I'll email you sometime next week, and we'll set it up with you. Your team will educate you more around it. We'll talk about how it fits in with Commander. But obviously, we see this as a huge opportunity for you guys, huge opportunity to continue to push forward around the conversation around smart buildings and driving additional value. It's not just, hey, let's put information in the cloud, let's put that information. My very last comment is this: there will be beer and wine on the other side of this door right away, which is in the gold sponsors room. So please go enjoy some of that before the final session. But thank you guys all for being here.